Picture a machine born not from a boardroom spreadsheet, but from a racer's obsession with perfection. A machine designed to blur the line between competition and the street. Imagine the shimmer of aluminum where cost accountants would normally demand steel. The shriek of an engine built for circuits yet civilized enough for boulevards. The unmistakable silhouette that told anyone watching they were in the presence of something rare. This wasn't built for everyone. It was built for those who demanded more than transportation, who wanted a slice of the racetrack in their garage. Over time, it stopped being just a motorcycle and became something bigger, an emblem of technology pushed to its limits, of craftsmanship meeting passion, of speed distilled into an icon. And decades later, its aura hasn't dimmed. The story of how a racing legend escaped its paddock roots and became the dream pinned on countless bedroom walls is more than nostalgia. It's about ambition, legacy, and the enduring pull of mechanical art. Stick around as we trace how it all happened. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment with what you'd like to see covered next. The Honda RC30 arrived in 1987 as a motorcycle, unlike anything else on the road, and right from its debut, it carried the weight of expectation. This was not another sport bike dressed up in flashy colors. It was a machine deliberately engineered to win championships, then carefully adapted so a select group of riders could experience something close to race-bred perfection in everyday life. The RC30, formerly known as the VFR 750R, was Honda's showcase of what it could achieve when engineers were given permission to design without compromise. To understand why it matters, you have to look at the world it entered and the philosophy behind it. Through the 1980s, the superbike scene was exploding. Manufacturers were pushing displacement, horsepower, and new technology to grab attention in showrooms. For Honda, though, brute force wasn't enough. There was a deeper desire to translate the company's track record in endurance and superbike racing into a production machine. The RC30 was born from the mindset that racing improves the breed, and if buyers could taste that connection, they'd appreciate the brand's credibility even more. The engineering itself was striking, but the real story is in the decisions behind it. Honda didn't just take an existing engine and rework it. Instead, they designed a liquid-cooled 748cc V4 that shared much of its DNA with endurance race engines. Gear-driven cams gave it precision and a unique mechanical wail that owners still describe as addictive. Lightweight titanium connecting rods, unheard of in street bikes at the time, let the engine rev with a freedom competitors struggled to match. The frame was an aluminum twin-spar design, paired with single-sided swing-arm suspension that was not only eye-catching, but practical for rapid wheel changes in racing. These choices were not cheap. In fact, the RC30's production was limited precisely because Honda poured so much resource into each bike. The trade-off was clear: higher price and exclusivity for customers, but an unmatched reputation for delivering something pure. Owning one meant being part of a small club, and even at the dealership level, availability was scarce. Dealers knew they weren't just selling motorcycles. They were delivering halo products designed to elevate the brand. For riders, the experience was transformative. On the street, the RC30 was more composed than expected, with a balance and stability that reflected its endurance roots. It wasn't a brutal, hard-to-manage racer. Rather, it delivered feedback in a way that encouraged precision. But make no mistake, it was sharp enough that only skilled hands could extract its full potential. For everyday use, it was impractical in the best possible sense. Uncomfortable on long rides, expensive to maintain, and in need of regular attention. Yet for those who accepted those quirks, every ride reinforced the feeling of sitting on a piece of racing heritage. The culture around it quickly built momentum. Riders who managed to buy one often treated it with reverence, knowing that it was more than just another superbike. Motorcycle magazines raved about its refinement and its sense of purpose, and photographs of its tricolor paint scheme, red, white, and blue, spread quickly through enthusiast circles. The RC30 looked different, sounded different, and carried itself with an aura of legitimacy that no marketing campaign could fake. The exclusivity created another effect. For many, the RC30 existed more as a dream than a reality. Posters on bedroom walls, glossy magazine spreads, or fleeting glimpses at track days cemented its status as an aspirational object. Even people who couldn't ride one felt its pull, and that cultural visibility was a powerful part of its identity. It was a halo bike in the truest sense, never designed to sell in huge numbers, but designed to prove a point. Looking back, segment 1 of this story is about origins, the decisions, trade-offs, and cultural conditions that allowed the Honda RC30 to exist in the first place. It was never a safe business move, nor a mainstream product, but that's precisely why it became so influential. As demand grew, so did curiosity. How would this rare, race-bred motorcycle perform in the real world of competition, and could it live up to the immense promise surrounding it? That's where the next chapter of the story takes us. The Honda RC30 stepped into competition with the same confidence it carried on the showroom floor, and within months its reputation in racing began to justify the bold engineering choices. The RC30 wasn't built for marketing hype. It was created to dominate the newly launched World Superbike Championship, and almost immediately it did just that. Riders discovered that the V4's broad power band and the chassis' predictability gave it a distinct edge, particularly in endurance events where reliability and consistency mattered as much as raw speed. The RC30 showed the world that Honda's road-legal superbike wasn't just a showcase, it was a winning weapon. For US enthusiasts, this performance wasn't an abstract story happening overseas. The RC30 appeared on American racetracks and proved its worth against machines from rival manufacturers. What set it apart wasn't just horsepower, it was the way every component worked in harmony. The single-sided swing arm, while eye-catching, allowed for quick pit-stop wheel swaps that gave endurance teams precious time advantages. The gear-driven cams kept the engine rock solid under stress, meaning fewer failures during grueling competitions. This practical performance edge meant victories stacked up, and every headline reinforced the bike's growing legend. But with racing success came an interesting cultural phenomenon. The RC30 was no longer just an engineering marvel. It was becoming a symbol. Motorcycle magazines filled their pages with images of the tricolor machine crossing finish lines, and fans quickly associated the design with excellence. This visibility turned the RC30 into a shorthand for the very idea of a superbike. Even people who had never thrown a leg over one could recognize its silhouette and associate it with victory. It wasn't just competing, it was shaping how people imagined the top tier of motorcycle performance. Of course, success breeds competition, and rival brands scrambled to produce answers. Some leaned on larger displacement, some on turbocharging, some on radical new chassis experiments. Yet many of these efforts fell short because they were designed as showroom strategies rather than deeply integrated racing projects. The RC30's advantage was that it was a racing machine first and a showroom bike second. That authenticity gave it credibility no marketing budget could buy. And as its victories piled up, so did its desirability on the street. The aftermarket world also embraced the RC30. Because it was limited in production, modifications were often handled with care. Owners treated it like a thoroughbred. Still, suspension upgrades, exhaust systems, and even engine tuning became part of its second life, especially among privateer racers who wanted to squeeze every bit of performance without undermining reliability. This created a feedback loop. The bike was good enough to win in factory hands, yet versatile enough that dedicated enthusiasts could adapt it to their own goals. In the US, regulations and pricing created additional drama. The RC30's high price tag meant that few ever landed in American garages, and import rules made access even tougher. That rarity elevated its mystique. Seeing one in person became a story in itself. The limited numbers also turned it into a collector's prize almost immediately, even while it was still competitive on the track. Riders in America who did manage to own one found themselves at the center of attention wherever they went. The racing legacy and cultural visibility intertwined. On one hand, the RC30 was a brutally effective superbike, collecting wins and setting benchmarks. On the other, it became one of the most photographed, posterized, and admired motorcycles of its era. It was no longer just a Honda, it was the superbike that symbolized what the late 1980s and early 1990s were all about: pushing limits, embracing technology, and blurring the lines between racing fantasy and street reality. As the competitive landscape evolved, newer machines with more displacement and advanced electronics began to appear, yet the RC30 retained a special aura. Even as regulations shifted and horsepower wars escalated, the RC30's balanced package reminded riders and engineers that pure design could be timeless. The question now wasn't whether it could keep winning. Eventually, time always catches up, but whether it had already achieved something greater. Had the RC30 transcended the racetrack to become a permanent part of motorcycling's cultural DNA? That's the question we'll answer in the next chapter. The Honda RC30, built between 1987 and 1990, entered legend not simply because of what it achieved in its own time, but because of how it shaped the years that followed. The motorcycle didn't fade away after production ended. It became a benchmark. Future superbikes were measured against it, and in many ways they were forced to catch up to what the RC30 had already proven possible. Its technology, once viewed as extravagant, set blueprints that Honda and others would quietly adopt for decades. The RC30 showed that a road-legal bike could carry genuine race engineering without compromise, and that lesson reverberated through design studios and paddocks around the world. Racers and engineers alike pointed to the RC30's use of exotic materials and advanced features as a turning point. Gear-driven cams became synonymous with precision. Titanium rods hinted at what was possible in lightweight strength. The compact V4 layout demonstrated that efficiency and balance mattered as much as outright horsepower. Even its single-sided swing arm, once seen as unnecessary showmanship, proved invaluable in racing, allowing for lightning-quick wheel changes. These elements, stitched together, created not just a motorcycle but a manifesto of what performance could look like when cost was not the primary concern. Among enthusiasts, the RC30's legacy grew into something almost mythical. Limited production and immediate racing success ensured that collectors treated surviving examples like treasure. Prices climbed steadily over the years, and owning one became less about riding and more about stewardship. In the US especially, where so few units were imported, the RC30 became a holy grail for riders and collectors who wanted to connect to a moment when motorcycle engineering seemed unbounded by market pragmatism. Even today, the sight of one on the road or at a show stops enthusiasts in their tracks because everyone understands they're looking at a piece of history. Yet the RC30's lasting significance isn't only about nostalgia or scarcity. It taught manufacturers that riders would respond to innovation even if it came at a premium. It demonstrated that homologation specials could serve dual roles, dominating on the racetrack while elevating brand image on the street. Without the RC30, later icons might not have existed in the same form, because it gave permission for engineers to think boldly and trust that enthusiasts would appreciate it. That ripple effect continues today in the DNA of high-performance motorcycles that balance road use with track-ready capability. Looking back, the Honda RC30 wasn't just a product of its time, it was a machine that seemed to escape time altogether. It was futuristic when it launched, dominant while it raced, and revered long after production stopped. Its impact can still be felt in the way we talk about balance, precision, and the fine art of building a motorcycle that isn't just transportation, but an engineering statement. The RC30 didn't simply win championships, it won a permanent place in the story of motorcycling. And that is what cements it as more than a machine. It is a legend whose influence remains alive every time a new superbike rolls onto the stage. The Honda RC30 stands today as one of the clearest examples of how a motorcycle can move beyond being just a machine and become something enduring in culture, ownership, and memory. For American riders, its story is especially unique. Limited numbers ever reached US shores, and those that did carried price tags that made them inaccessible to most enthusiasts at the time. Yet that scarcity only amplified its desirability. Today, spotting an RC30 at a bike night or on the auction block is enough to draw a crowd, because even among superbikes, its reputation stands apart. For collectors, ownership has become as much about stewardship as riding. The RC30 demands meticulous care. Parts are scarce, maintenance is precise, and costs are high. Yet those who invest in it know they're preserving a landmark in engineering. For riders determined to experience it on the road, the reality is both thrilling and challenging. Its V4 engine still delivers a sound and sensation unlike anything else, and its handling, while not as razor-edged as modern superbikes, remains remarkably poised. But comfort is minimal, and practicality was never part of the design brief. Living with an RC30 today means balancing nostalgia with mechanical diligence. Pricing reflects its place in history. On the US market, examples that once sat unsold in showrooms now command six-figure sums at auctions, depending on originality and mileage. Clean, low-mileage RC30s are treated like blue-chip investments, while even well-ridden examples hold strong value. That escalation underscores not only its rarity, but also the reverence the community has for what it represents. Few motorcycles of its era command the same respect, and even fewer manage to blend competitive legacy with cultural iconography so seamlessly. The availability of the RC30 remains slim, and many US enthusiasts turn to import channels to secure one. The process is neither cheap nor easy, but for those who succeed, the reward is owning a piece of racing history that continues to spark conversation decades after its debut. Reliability, when maintained properly, is excellent. The gear-driven cams and overbuilt racing DNA ensure durability, but neglect can be costly. Buyers must approach ownership with clear eyes, understanding that this isn't a motorcycle to cut corners on. What makes the RC30's story resonate is the balance it struck, engineered as a championship-winning tool, but embraced as a cultural icon. It delivered on track, inspired on posters, and continues to set the standard for what a halo motorcycle can be. For US audiences, the takeaway is simple. The RC30 was never meant to be practical, common, or ordinary. It was designed to inspire, and it still does. In the end, the Honda RC30 isn't just remembered for victories or rarity. It's remembered for showing what happens when ambition outweighs compromise, when engineers are given the freedom to create without restraint, and when a machine earns a place in both racing history and popular imagination. It remains a legend because it never settled for less. And that's why, decades later, the Honda RC30 is still the superbike that defined a generation.